So Princess Anne removed Camilla from the Sovereign's Parade guest list this week, and the most telling part isn't even the removal itself, it's that the decision held, it wasn't walked back, it wasn't softened with some last-minute scheduling conflict excuse, and Charles didn't override it. That's where this whole thing gets genuinely interesting, because we're not talking about a seating chart at a family dinner. We're talking about one of those ceremonial events where you stand, where you sit, and whether you're even on the page at all, sends a message that every single person in that world knows how to read. And the message here wasn't subtle. Before we get into how this all unfolded, make sure to hit subscribe to Crown Watch so you don't miss updates on stories like this. Now let's break down what actually happened. The palace found out about this decision through paperwork, not through some dramatic announcement. The updated guest list went out, and Camilla's name simply wasn't on it anymore. Not moved to a different position, not shifted to arrive separately, not adjusted to a less prominent seat, removed. And when Camilla got that page in her hands, the reaction wasn't outrage in front of staff or some emotional outburst, it was silence. She looked at the list once, then again, scanning the formal arrangement where her place should have been, and there was just nothing there. That kind of quiet in a royal household is actually louder than any argument, because it means everyone in the room understood the weight of what they were seeing before anyone said a word. Charles was standing near a window when the reality of the situation landed, and from what we're hearing, he had the look of someone who knew bad news had arrived before anyone had the nerve to say it out loud. He understood immediately that this guest list wasn't casual paperwork that someone in the planning office had messed up. Anne doesn't make careless amendments. She doesn't act on impulse. She's been inside that system for decades, and she knows exactly what every ceremonial decision communicates. So when her office pushed through a revision that erased the Queen Consort from a major military ceremony, Charles knew this wasn't a mistake that could be fixed with a quick phone call. This was deliberate, and the way it was done, clean, final, not marked as temporary, not framed as an adjustment, made it clear that Anne had no intention of leaving room for negotiation. The Sovereign's Parade itself is one of those events that matters more than a casual observer might realize. It's a formal military ceremony where royal presence signals unity, loyalty, and the authority of the crown. Every person included near the center helps shape the message of who is trusted close to the monarchy. So when Camilla's name disappeared from that list, it wasn't just a personal snub, it was a public statement about her standing, and Anne knew exactly what she was doing when she signed off on it. The senior aide who delivered the confirmation didn't cushion the words. This wasn't explained away as illness or scheduling pressure or some desire for a smaller attendance plan. The amendment came directly from Anne, and the aide's lowered voice apparently made the truth feel even heavier in that room. Charles asked to approve the final version, but the question kind of died before it really reached anyone. Nobody rushed to answer because nobody needed to. Anne's authority had moved through the official order with quiet precision, and the most alarming detail for Camilla wasn't even the removal itself, it was the way it was written into the document. It stood there as a direct correction to the guest arrangement, and the permanence of it was unmistakable. Camilla finally lowered the page, and from what's being reported, the silence around her became genuinely unbearable. Charles looked from the document to the faces near him, visibly torn between the husband who wanted to fight for his wife and the monarch who recognized that Anne's grip on ceremonial discipline wasn't something you could just override without consequences. That's the core tension here. Charles has spent years defending Camilla's place beside him, turning what started as a private devotion into public duty, working to normalize her role after all the history and all the controversy. But this single amendment struck at the very thing he'd been trying to protect. His wife hadn't been asked to accept a quieter seat. She hadn't been asked to arrive under a different arrangement. She had been removed entirely, and every person close to the crown understood what that meant. This wasn't only about one parade. This was about who has the right to stand close to the crown when trust has become fragile. Now, to understand why Anne moved so decisively, you have to go back to what happened before that guest list was ever revised. Every palace rupture has a beginning, and this one started behind closed doors during a quiet rehearsal briefing for the Sovereign's Parade. Camilla reached for influence in that room that she was never meant to hold, and the people who were there remembered the silence afterward. Not because anyone shouted, Anne didn't shout, but because what happened in that briefing crossed a line that Anne clearly decided could not be uncrossed. Charles had entered that briefing thinking it would be routine, the kind of controlled discussion where details get polished and everyone moves on. But the air changed when Camilla began pushing for her role near the royal party to be strengthened. She argued that her position beside Charles should be visibly reinforced, not softened or hidden behind careful wording. And honestly, you can understand the human impulse there. The queen consort had endured years of public judgment, years of comparison, years of feeling like she had to prove she belonged. In that room, her request carried the weight of someone who was tired of justifying her existence. But the more she pushed, the more Anne withdrew into silence, and that restraint apparently made the room more tense than any raised voice could have achieved. Anne finally set her pen down slowly and deliberately, and everyone understood that the discussion had crossed the line. She told Camilla that the parade was not a personal restoration platform. Protocol, she said, could not be bent to soothe private insecurity. That word choice is doing a lot of work here. Private insecurity isn't a diplomatic phrase. It's direct. It turns a ceremonial disagreement into something deeply personal, and it makes clear that Anne viewed Camilla's request not as a legitimate discussion about positioning, but as an attempt to use a state ceremony to address a personal wound. Charles looked toward his sister, then toward his wife, trapped between loyalty and duty, knowing both women believed they were defending the crown in completely different ways. Camilla didn't step back. She suggested that Anne's guest arrangement felt unnecessarily severe, and that was a trigger everyone would later remember. Anne closed the folder immediately. No dramatic speech followed. No compromise was offered. The briefing ended with the kind of calm that feels more final than anger ever could. Charles understood then that his sister had made a decision inside herself before anyone else had the courage to name it. Anne carried that folder out under her arm, and the room remained heavy behind her. Days later, that same folder would return with one name missing and no apology attached. Once that rehearsal room door closed, the confrontation was only waiting for the right hallway. And it came not in a throne room, not before cameras, not beneath chandeliers arranged for state drama. It came in a corridor where footsteps carried faster than secrets and faces betrayed what titles tried to hide. Camilla wanted an explanation. Anne had already given one. Charles stood between them, realizing too late that silence could no longer protect anyone. Camilla moved toward Anne with the amended list still in her hand, and from the descriptions coming out, that paper seemed heavier than any royal jewels she'd ever worn. The removal had already wounded her pride, but now it demanded a voice. She asked whether humiliation had become official policy, and those words cut through the corridor with the force of someone who had spent too long swallowing judgment. This wasn't only about missing a ceremony. The Sovereign's Parade is one of those royal moments where attendance carries meaning beyond mere presence. It tells the household, the military, and the watching public who remains trusted close to the crown. So being removed wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a verdict. Charles stepped in before the exchange could harden beyond repair. He had followed Camilla because he knew the damage could spread quickly if staff heard anger moving through private walls. The king wanted calm. He wanted room to soften what Anne had done, to turn an open wound into a misunderstanding, to protect his wife without appearing to challenge his sister, but Anne gave him no easy path. She stood still, her voice low and precise, and told Camilla that public ceremony could not be used to repair private standing. Camilla didn't accept those words quietly. She looked from Anne to Charles, searching for loyalty and finding hesitation instead. The queen consort had fought for years to be seen as part of the monarchy's future, not just its difficult past, and now the very system she had worked to enter seemed to be closing around her. Anne's answer made that pain worse, because it wasn't emotional, it was controlled. It sounded less like anger and more like judgment. Charles tried again to interrupt, but Anne turned toward him with the calm force of someone who had already crossed the point of retreat. She told him the crown could not afford another appearance clouded by internal tension. That phrase struck him because it carried more than complaint. It carried warning. Anne was saying that Camilla's presence at the parade would not strengthen unity. It would pull attention toward division, toward whispers, toward every unresolved fracture the palace had tried to bury under polished ceremony. Then Camilla's voice changed when she asked whether Charles had agreed to it. That question was more dangerous than any accusation because it demanded a choice: husband or king, defender or guardian of order. Charles opened his mouth, but the pause came first, and that pause became the answer no one wanted to hear. Camilla understood it instantly. Anne understood it too. The silence betrayed him before his words could rescue him. Anne didn't press further. She didn't need to. The decision had already done its work, and the corridor had exposed what the guest list only hinted at. When Anne walked away, she left Charles facing Camilla alone, and the space between them filled with everything neither could say. He had not removed her name, but he had failed to restore it. She had not lost a seat, but she had lost certainty. Here's what makes Anne's authority in this situation so difficult to challenge. It didn't come only from sharp words in a corridor. It came from a deeper power that Camilla seems to have underestimated. The palace had always known Anne could be firm, but this moment revealed something more dangerous than temperament. She knows the rules. She understands the machinery. She can move within the ancient structure of ceremony with a confidence that makes resistance look reckless. Camilla challenged the guest list and got answered with the weight of the institution itself. Charles didn't need anyone to explain why Anne's move carried such force, but he still read the file as if the pages might offer a softer truth. A senior courtier stood nearby, watching the king's expression shift from irritation to something heavier, something closer to reluctant understanding. Anne's influence hadn't appeared overnight. It came from decades of service, discipline, and the kind of ceremonial experience no palace advisor could manufacture. She understands royal order because she has lived inside it, guarded it, and watched what happens when personal desire tries to bend it. The Sovereign's Parade guest list is more than attendance. It's a controlled statement of who belongs near the ceremonial heart of monarchy, a formal arrangement that tells the household, the military, and the public who stands inside the circle of trust. Charles knew this, and that knowledge made the file harder to challenge. If he reversed Anne too quickly, he wouldn't simply restore Camilla, he would expose a fracture in the very system meant to show unity. A private wound would become a public contradiction. Anne's amendment was colder than Charles expected. She hadn't merely erased Camilla's name and left an empty space behind. She had reorganized the nearby positions, tightened the order, and reshaped the arrangement so the removal looked deliberate, structured, and final. That precision unsettled him more than anger would have done. Anger can be calmed. Precision has to be answered. And the king understood with growing discomfort that his sister had prepared for resistance before anyone dared offer it. Charles found the private note attached to the file and stopped reading for a moment before returning to the line that mattered most. The parade, Anne wrote, must proceed without personal dispute affecting sovereign representation. Those words carried no insult on the surface, yet they landed like a verdict. Anne wasn't accusing Camilla openly. She was doing something more powerful. She was defining the danger and placing duty above sympathy, order above comfort, and ceremony above one woman's need to be publicly reassured. Camilla had already felt that consequence before Charles finished the final page. She knew she had been outmaneuvered before the week's ceremony even began. The Queen Consort had expected a dispute, perhaps even a private apology, but Anne had built the decision into the official structure itself. Charles finally set the file down without speaking, and in that silence, everyone understood the palace machinery had chosen stability over emotion. Once the palace machinery accepted Anne's decision, the fallout moved from private rooms into every relationship surrounding the crown. And fallout rarely begins with shouting. Sometimes it begins with a door that does not open, a call that is not returned, a chair quietly removed from a room where someone expected to sit. For Camilla, the first sign of the new reality came with brutal simplicity. The preparations continued without her, and no one rushed to correct it. Camilla entered the planning room, expecting the usual rhythm of ceremony to bend back around her. There should have been a schedule pack waiting, a folder marked with her attendance notes, a place prepared for the Queen Consort as if the earlier tension had been only a temporary storm. Instead, the table had already moved on. The Sovereign's Parade preparations were now being carried out under the revised guest arrangement, and that matters because once a royal ceremony enters final planning, changes stop feeling like suggestions and begin to feel like facts. Anne's order had not been debated into weakness. It had been accepted. The silence in the room hurt more than any open challenge. Staff had been instructed to proceed without discussing the change publicly, and that discipline created its own kind of cruelty. Nobody corrected Camilla because there was nothing left to correct. Nobody rushed toward her because no one had been given permission to rescue the moment she saw the absence before anyone explained it. Her folder was gone, her place had been reassigned, the ceremony was moving forward, and she was no longer inside its machinery. Camilla asked one aide where her schedule pack had been placed, and the hesitation that followed became the answer. It was only a few seconds, but inside those seconds lived the whole truth of her new position. The aide didn't insult her, the aide didn't refuse her, the aide simply paused long enough for the Queen Consort to understand that Anne's decision had traveled farther than a private disagreement. It had reached the desks, the briefings, the timing sheets, and the people trained never to react. Charles learned soon after that the final ceremonial briefing had already moved forward without Camilla's attendance notes included. That detail struck him harder than he expected. A private argument could still be softened, a public correction could still be shaped, but a finalized briefing without his wife inside it meant the palace had chosen a path. The king could feel the decision hardening around him, turning from family conflict into institutional reality. He had wanted time and had used procedure. William was quietly informed next, and his response carried its own warning. The prince didn't react with shock. He didn't demand an explanation. He paused, measured, and controlled, as if the decision confirmed something he had already feared. Charles watched that restraint closely because silence from William is rarely empty. It usually means judgment is forming behind it. Charles finally asked whether Anne had gone too far, but the question didn't land where he hoped. William chose his words with care, knowing that one careless answer could turn family pain into a battle over the future. And in that careful pause, the king understood that his son was no longer looking only at Camilla's absence. He was looking at what the monarchy would become if personal wounds kept shaping public duty. That's when this stopped being only about Anne and Camilla. It became about the future of the monarchy. The decisive moment came without aides, without papers, and without anyone to soften the truth. Charles and William stood alone in a private room, father and son facing a decision neither could reduce to protocol. Anne had removed Camilla from a parade list, but William understood the deeper question. Whether the monarchy would protect feelings or protect trust, Charles looked at his son with the exhaustion of a man carrying two loyalties that refused to live peacefully together. He didn't ask as king first, he asked as a husband. He wanted William's honest view, but he also wanted a way back, a careful path that could restore Camilla without humiliating Anne or turning the weak ceremony into a royal standoff. The prince understood the danger immediately. If the removal was reversed too quickly, the crown wouldn't look compassionate, it would look divided. It would look as if ceremony could be bent by pressure after Anne had already drawn the line. William knew his aunt's authority couldn't be weakened lightly. Anne had acted within the ceremonial structure, and that mattered because royal order depends on the belief that certain decisions are steady once made. The sovereign's parade is not a family luncheon where wounded pride can be soothed with a quiet apology. It's a public expression of disciplined loyalty and command. If Charles overruled Anne for emotional reasons, the palace would send a dangerous message that personal discomfort could outrank institutional trust. Charles spoke of Camilla's pain, and for a moment the room felt less like a royal chamber and more like a family trapped by history. He said she would not see this as discipline. She would see it as rejection. William didn't dismiss that suffering. He knew the queen consort would feel the absence deeply, and he understood that no official wording could soften what removal means. But his answer came with the calm weight of a future king. Public duty, he told Charles, sometimes required private pain to remain private. Those words struck harder because they weren't cruel, they were true. William revealed that staff confidence had already shifted toward Anne's version of events. She had acted before the dispute could damage the parade itself, before whispers became open embarrassment, before the monarchy appeared to be managing feelings instead of command. Charles heard the warning beneath his son's restraint. Restoring Camilla would not heal the wound. It would expose it. William left the room without triumph, and Charles remained behind with the silence he had feared most. He didn't call Anne. He didn't reverse the order. He let the decision stand, and in that refusal to act, the final direction of the week became clear. By then, the palace could contain the decision, but it could no longer contain the meaning, and the outside world began to read the silence. By morning, the story had escaped the velvet walls. It was no longer a private amendment, no longer a tense exchange between royals, no longer a folded list on a polished table. It became an image the country could understand immediately. Princess Anne standing firm, Camilla absent, and the monarchy choosing order over emotional repair. Camilla learned quickly that silence can travel faster than any official statement. The sovereign's parade suddenly became the center of national attention because her name was missing from the official guest list this week. Palace officials tried to keep their words narrow. They spoke of ceremonial arrangements, careful planning, and the need for focus, but restraint didn't protect her. The absence itself became louder than the explanation, and every controlled phrase made the wound feel more deliberate. Camilla watched the coverage privately, holding her expression steady with the kind of discipline royal life demands from those already hurting. She understood the danger immediately. The public wasn't seeing an illness, a diary change, or a minor adjustment. They were seeing a message. They were seeing Anne's decision stand untouched. The queen consort had wanted visibility beside Charles, yet now her invisibility carried more power than any appearance could have done. That was the cruel turn. Her removal had become the story. Anne received the morning papers without triumph. She didn't celebrate, she didn't soften. The Princess Royal understood that victory inside a family can still feel like loss. Her decision had protected order, but it had also exposed pain. A major newspaper front page captured the whole rupture in one brutal frame. Anne in uniform beside the headline, parade line drawn, with a smaller image of Camilla from a previous ceremony beneath it. The country didn't need a long explanation. The page told them everything. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered by the gates, not shouting, not waving banners, but reading updates on phones and murmuring with the strange quiet that comes when people sense history turning. Some wondered whether Anne had gone too far. Others whispered that she had finally done what others avoided. That matters because public feeling can harden palace choices. Once the nation begins reading silence as judgment, even the king cannot easily rewrite the meaning. Charles saw that truth with painful clarity. He could fight the story emotionally and risk making the fracture larger, or he could accept what the decision had already declared. Camilla's absence had moved beyond private injury. Anne's firmness had become public symbolism. William's restraint had become future direction. And when the noise settled, what remained was not scandal, but judgment. The kind only history gives after the shouting stops. In the end, the most powerful statement at the Sovereign's parade wasn't spoken from a podium, printed in a bulletin, or whispered by a palace aide. It was an empty place where Camilla had expected to stand. Princess Anne's decision didn't merely remove an aim, it defined a boundary, and everyone around the crown understood exactly what had changed. Camilla stayed away, but her absence entered the ceremony before any formal word could explain it. The Sovereign's parade moved forward with the revised guest list intact, and that matters because the palace had endured private pressure, emotional appeals, and public attention, yet Anne's decision still survived. The Queen Consort could no longer frame the removal as confusion or timing. Her missing place had become the message. Charles watched the ceremony with the restraint of a man who had lost an argument without ever raising his voice. The king carried two wounds at once: the sadness of a husband who could not undo the pain dealt to his wife, and the duty of a monarch who could not ignore why the decision had stood. He knew the monarchy had presented a controlled exterior, but behind that calm surface lay a clear internal verdict. Ceremonial trust had to be protected, even when personal relationships suffered. Anne didn't need to explain herself again. She had already spoken through action, and that action became stronger because it held under pressure. The Princess Royal had proved something the palace rarely says out loud. Closeness to the crown is not guaranteed by marriage, emotion, or expectation. It must be supported by trust. That was why her move carried such force. She hadn't simply blocked Camilla from one event. She had drawn a line around the ceremony itself and forced everyone else to respect it. William's silence confirmed what Charles could no longer avoid. The prince had refused to push for reversal, and that restraint revealed the future shape of the monarchy more clearly than any public statement could. He understood that fragile compromises might soothe the present, but they could weaken the institution waiting for him. The future king chose discipline over comfort, clarity over emotional repair, and confidence over confusion. In doing so, he left Camilla wounded, but he left the crown steadier. The final emotional verdict was impossible to soften. Anne's removal of Camilla from the Sovereign's parade guest list marked the moment private discomfort gave way to public order. Camilla lost a place at one ceremony, but the monarchy gained a sharper boundary around what duty demands. Charles was left wounded, Anne was left vindicated, William was left steadier, and the crown emerged colder but clearer. The parade ended not with reconciliation, but with a truth no one inside the palace could deny. In the House of Windsor, absence can speak louder than any crown.